A millionaire marries a virgin woman, and on their first night together he tells her, "I'll make you a woman." His wife, who had been silent until then, reveals something that completely changes their honeymoon. The millionaire, used to controlling everything, finds himself facing his own abyss. Check out this beautiful story full of twists and leave your comment. The Manhattan skyline glittered against the night sky as Maxwell Reed stared out from his penthouse office. At 42, he had everything a man could desire. A fortune spanning billions, a real estate empire stretching across 3 continents, and now, a beautiful young wife waiting for him at home in their Hamptons estate. "Another scotch, sir?" his assistant asked, hovering by the door. "No, Sarah. I should get home to Ellie." Maxwell straightened his custom Tom Ford suit and checked his Patek Philippe watch, a small fortune adorning his wrist. "My wife is waiting." The word wife still felt new on his tongue, though they'd been married for 2 weeks now. Eleanor. Bennett, now Eleanor Reed, was 27, with honey blonde hair and eyes that reminded him of summer skies. She came from a small town in Virginia, raised in a conservative household where tradition and modesty were paramount. In Ellie, Maxwell saw something increasingly rare in his world: purity. His driver waited with the Bentley as Maxwell descended to the street level. New York City pulsed around him, but his mind was already at the Hamptons estate where he'd arranged for their delayed honeymoon to begin tonight. Work had kept him in the city until now, but Maxwell had plans, meticulous, detailed plans, for their first real night together as husband and wife. The drive was peaceful, giving Maxwell time to reflect on the path that had led him here. Born to wealthy but emotionally distant parents in Boston, he'd learned early that control was the key to success. His father, Jonathan Reed, had built their family fortune through shrewd investments and unwavering discipline. "Never show weakness. Maxwell," he'd say, "the world belongs to those who maintain control." Maxwell had internalized those lessons, building his own empire with ruthless precision. Every acquisition, every business deal was executed flawlessly. His relationships followed the same pattern: carefully selected women who understood their role in his life, who knew the boundaries and never challenged them. Until Ellie. He'd met her at a charity gala in Virginia when expanding his business into the state. She was volunteering, a kindergarten teacher moonlighting to help raise funds for children's education. While other women at the event had vied for his attention, Ellie had barely noticed him, focused instead on ensuring the children's art auction ran smoothly. Her indifference had been intriguing, her genuine commitment to something beyond wealth and status refreshing. When he'd finally managed to speak with her, her southern politeness couldn't hide her unimpressed assessment of another rich man playing philanthropist. He'd been simultaneously offended and captivated. It had taken 3 months of persistent pursuit before she agreed to dinner. Another 6 months before she began to trust him. During that time, Maxwell discovered something unsettling. He was no longer the one in control. For the first time in his adult life, he wanted something he couldn't simply acquire. "We've arrived, Mr. Reed," his driver announced, pulling through the gates of the Hampton estate. The house stood magnificently against the backdrop of the Atlantic Ocean, a modern palace of glass and stone. Maxwell had purchased it specifically for Ellie, imagining her walking through its rooms, becoming the mistress of his world. Tonight would be the culmination of everything, the moment when Ellie truly became his. He found her on the terrace, looking out at the ocean. The evening breeze played with her hair, and the setting sun cast golden light across her features. She wore a simple white dress that contrasted with the ostentatious surroundings. "It's beautiful here," she said without turning, sensing his presence, "though it feels more like a museum than a home." Maxwell slid his arms around her waist. From behind, feeling her stiffen slightly at his touch, "We'll make it a home together," he whispered against her ear. "I've been thinking about tonight all day." Ellie turned in his arms, her expression complex. "Max, we need to talk." He frowned. About us, about expectations." She stepped away from him, creating distance. "I know what tonight means to you." Maxwell smiled, misinterpreting her meaning. "It's important for both of us, Ellie, the beginning of our life together." He reached for her hand, his thumb brushing over the platinum wedding band he'd placed. There. I've waited patiently. That's exactly it, Max. You've been waiting for something. She hesitated. Something that doesn't exist. A chill ran through him that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze. What are you talking about? Ellie's eyes met his, steadier than he'd ever seen them. I need to be honest with you. I think I've let you believe something about me that isn't true, and I can't start our marriage with this lie between us. Ellie, I'm not a virgin, Max. The words hung in the air between them. Maxwell felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He'd never explicitly asked, of course, that would have been crude. But her upbringing, her demeanor, the way she'd demurred from physical intimacy during their courtship, everything had led him to believe. There was someone before, she continued, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. His name was Daniel. We were engaged. Maxwell turned away, struggling to process this revelation. It wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about the narrative he'd constructed, the fantasy he'd built around her. Ellie was supposed to be untouched, unshaped by another man's influence. She was meant to be his canvas. Why didn't you tell me before? His voice was dangerously quiet. I tried, Max, several times. But I could see how you looked at me, what you thought of me, and I was afraid. She paused. I was afraid you wouldn't want me anymore. The admission should have softened him, but instead it fueled his anger. She'd known what he believed, what he wanted, and she'd allowed him to continue in his delusion. So our entire relationship has been based on deception. He turned back to her, his expression hardened. No, that's not fair. I never lied to you. You assumed and I... She wrapped her arms around herself. I let you assume because I was scared to lose you. Maxwell laughed bitterly. How convenient. And this, Daniel, what happened there? Pain flickered across Ellie's face. It ended badly. He wasn't who I thought he was. And what am I to you, Eleanor? Another mistake, another man who isn't who you thought he was? His words were razors designed to cut. You're my husband, she said softly. I chose you, Max. I love you. But I need you to love me for who I actually am, not who you've imagined me to be. Love. The word echoed strangely in Maxwell's mind. He'd never spoken of love to Ellie. He'd promised her security, status, a good life. Love was an abstraction, a fantasy for people who didn't understand the realities of power and control. And who are you exactly? He asked, his tone cold. Because the woman I married wouldn't have hidden something like this. Ellie's expression hardened slightly. The man I thought I married wouldn't reduce me to my past. We all have histories, Max, including you. The implication stung. Maxwell had been careful to present a sanitized version of his romantic past to Ellie. She knew he'd had relationships, of course, but not the extent of his manipulations, the women he'd controlled and discarded when they no longer served his purpose. This isn't about me, he deflected. This is about trust, Eleanor. How can I trust you now? Trust works both ways, Max. She stepped closer, her eyes searching his. Do you trust me with the real you? Or am I just supposed to be grateful that Maxwell Reed chose me and accept whatever version of yourself you decide to show me? Maxwell felt his control slipping further. This wasn't how tonight was supposed to unfold. Ellie was challenging him, pushing back against the narrative he'd constructed so carefully. I think we both need some time to reflect, he said finally, retreating to safer ground. I have calls to make. We'll discuss this later. As he turned to leave, Ellie's voice stopped him. We can't build a real marriage on fantasy, Max. Eventually the real world breaks through. He didn't respond, walking back into the house with measured steps that betrayed none of the turmoil within. In his study, Maxwell poured himself a scotch with trembling hands. The perfect evening he'd planned lay in ruins, and with it the perfect wife he thought he'd found. His phone buzzed with a text from Cassandra Taylor, Ellie's childhood friend who had moved to New York years ago. She'd been maid of honor at their wedding, though Maxwell had always sensed her disapproval beneath her smiles. Checking in on Ellie. Everything okay? The message read. Maxwell set the phone down without replying. Cassandra had always been too perceptive, too protective of Ellie. He wondered suddenly how much she knew about Daniel, about Ellie's past, about his own intentions. Outside, the ocean crashed against the shore, indifferent to the upheaval in the glass mansion above. Maxwell drained his scotch and poured another, feeling the foundations of his carefully controlled world beginning to crack beneath him. The following morning, Ellie awoke alone in the master bedroom. The California king bed felt vast and empty, the sheets on Maxwell's side undisturbed. She'd waited for him until midnight, before finally surrendering to exhaustion, their conversation hanging unresolved between them. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the meticulously designed room. Everything in Maxwell's world was curated, from the custom furniture to the original paintings adorning the walls. Even the view had been purchased, the neighboring properties acquired and demolished to ensure unobstructed vistas of the Atlantic. Ellie slipped into a robe and wandered through the silent house. She found Maxwell in his home office, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his laptop open before him. The stubble on his jaw and the empty whiskey glass suggested he'd spent the night there. "Have you been here all night?" she asked from the doorway. Maxwell looked up, his blue eyes glacial. "I had work to attend to. Max, we need to finish our conversation. I believe you said everything necessary yesterday." His tone was clipped, professional, the voice he used with subordinates, not his wife. Ellie stepped into the room, refusing to be dismissed. "No, I didn't, and neither did you. Marriage means working through difficulties, not shutting down when things get uncomfortable." Maxwell's laugh was hollow. "Is that what they taught you in Virginia? Strange, I thought they also taught honesty and virtue." The barb struck its target, but Ellie stood her ground. "My parents taught me that a person's worth isn't determined by their past mistakes. They also taught me that pride can destroy even the strongest foundations." "How poetic," Maxwell replied, turning back to his laptop. "Unfortunately, I have a business to run. We can discuss your philosophical insights another time." Ellie moved forward and gently closed his laptop. "No, Max, we discuss this now. I'm your wife, not an appointment you can reschedule." For a moment, something dangerous flickered in Maxwell's eyes, a glimpse of the ruthlessness that had built his empire. Then it was gone, replaced by cold calculation. "Very well," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Let's discuss it. Tell me about Daniel." The name felt like a trap. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. When you met, how long you were together, why it ended." His gaze was unwavering. "If I'm to accept this part of your past, I deserve the details." Ellie took a deep breath. "We met in college. He was studying law. I was in education. We dated for 3 years and got engaged in our senior year. And the engagement ended because he changed," Ellie said simply. "Or maybe he just showed me who he really was all along. He became controlling, jealous. He wanted to dictate everything. Who I saw, what I wore, even what I studied." A flicker of something, recognition, crossed Maxwell's face. "He had a specific image of who I should be," she continued. "When I didn't fit that image, he tried to reshape me. When I resisted, She hesitated. "He what?" Maxwell's voice was tight. "He became someone I didn't recognize, someone I couldn't love." Ellie met his gaze steadily. "I ended it 2 months before the wedding. My parents were devastated. They loved Daniel, thought he was perfect. They didn't see what happened behind closed doors." Maxwell was silent for a long moment. "And you think I'm like him?" It wasn't a question. "No," Ellie said softly. "I think you could be if you continue down this path. But I married you because I saw something else in you, Max. Something genuine beneath all the walls you've built." His phone buzzed before he could respond. Maxwell glanced at it, his expression shifting. "I need to take this. We'll continue later." Ellie recognized the dismissal for what it was, retreat. She left him to his call, wandering out to the expansive deck overlooking the ocean. The vastness of the water reminded her how small she felt. In Maxwell's world, a world built on power and appearances. Her own phone chimed with a text from Cassandra. "Lunch today?" I'm in the Hamptons for a photo shoot. Need to see your face." Ellie smiled for the first time that day. Cassandra had been her anchor through everything. Daniel, her parents' disappointment, and now her turbulent beginning with Maxwell. Unlike everyone else in her life, Cassandra saw Ellie for who she truly was, not who others wanted her to be. "Yes, please, can you come here? Need friendly faces right now." Cassandra's reply was immediate. "That bad already? On my way. Hold tight." 2 hours later, Cassandra arrived at the estate, her vintage convertible incongruous among the luxury vehicles in the circular driveway. With her vibrant red hair and bohemian style, she looked utterly out of place in Maxwell's meticulous world, which was precisely why Ellie loved her. They settled in the garden away from the house and Maxwell's watchful eyes. Over lunch prepared by the estate's chef, Ellie recounted the previous evening's confrontation. "So you finally told him?" Cassandra said, leaning back in her chair. "About time. I've been telling you to come clean since your third date." "No way. No, I should have listened to you." Cassandra reached for her hand. "Hey, no regrets. You did it now. That's what matters. How did the almighty Mr. Reed take it?" "About as well as you predicted," Ellie admitted. "He's hurt, angry, feels betrayed." "He's controlling is what he is," Cassandra corrected. "This isn't about your past, Ellie. It's about his ego. You challenged the narrative he created." Ellie sighed. "It's more complicated than that, Cass." "Is it? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly like what happened with Daniel, just with better real estate and more expensive suits." Cassandra's green eyes were fierce with protective love. "You escaped one controlling relationship. Why did you jump into another?" "Max isn't Daniel." Ellie's defense was automatic, but even to her own ears it sounded hollow. "No, he's not," Cassandra agreed. "He's more dangerous because he's smarter. Daniel was an amateur. Maxwell Reed has been perfecting the art of control his entire life." Ellie glanced toward the house where Maxwell was visible through the window of his office, pacing as he spoke on the phone. "You don't know him like I do, Cass." "Maybe not," Cassandra conceded. "But I've done my research. Did you know his last 3 girlfriends all signed NDAs after their breakups? Or that his college girlfriend transferred schools mid-semester after they split?" Ellie stared at her friend. "How do you know this?" "I'm a journalist, remember? When my best friend decides to marry a billionaire after a whirlwind courtship, I investigate." Cassandra's expression softened. "I was hoping I wouldn't find anything. I wanted to be wrong about him for your sake." "What else?" Ellie's voice was barely audible. Cassandra hesitated. "His family history isn't the clean-cut success story he portrays. His father was notorious in Boston business circles, not just for his success, but for his methods. There were rumors of emotional abuse in the family, though nothing was ever confirmed publicly." The information settled heavily on Ellie's shoulders. She'd sensed the darkness in Maxwell's past, glimpsed it in the rare moments when his guard slipped. But she'd convinced herself she could heal those wounds, that her love would be enough to overcome the damage. "What should I do, Cass?" "That depends," her friend replied carefully. "Do you love him, Ellie? The real him, not the fantasy of who he could be?" The question hung between them as Maxwell emerged from the house, spotting them in the garden. His approach was unhurried, calculated, each step measured as he crossed the manicured lawn. "Cassandra," he greeted coolly. "I wasn't aware we were expecting visitors." "Last-minute plans," Cassandra replied, with an equally cool smile. "I was in the neighborhood for work." "How? Fortunate for us." Maxwell's gaze shifted to Ellie. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but I need to discuss something with my wife. Perhaps you could continue your visit another time." Cassandra's eyebrows rose. "I just got here, Max. Surely whatever you need to discuss can wait an hour." "Actually, it can't." His tone made it clear the matter wasn't up for debate. Ellie touched Cassandra's arm. "It's okay, Cass, I'll call you later." Reluctantly, Cassandra gathered her things. As she hugged Ellie goodbye, she whispered, "Remember who you are. Don't let him reshape you." Maxwell waited until Cassandra's car had disappeared down the driveway before turning to Ellie. "I've been thinking about our situation." "Our situation?" Ellie repeated. "You mean our marriage?" "Yes. Maxwell's expression was unreadable. I think we need to establish some parameters moving forward. Parameters, Ellie echoed, a chill running through her despite the warm summer air. What exactly does that mean? Maxwell gestured toward the house. Let's discuss this inside, shall we? Away from prying eyes. As Ellie followed her husband into the house that didn't feel like home, she couldn't shake Cassandra's warning. Remember, who you are, don't let him reshape you. But who was she now? The small-town teacher was gone, replaced by Mrs. Maxwell Reed, a role she hadn't fully defined yet. Inside, Maxwell led her to his study, his territory, where he held all the power. He closed the door behind them, the soft click sounding final, like a cage door shutting. I've decided to forgive your dishonesty, he began, as if bestowing a great gift. We all have pasts, as you pointed out. What matters is our future together. Relief washed over Ellie, quickly followed by wariness. Maxwell's sudden change of heart seemed too convenient, too calculated. Thank you, she said cautiously. I want us to move forward honestly. As do I. Maxwell moved to the bar cart, pouring 2 glasses of water. Which is why I want complete transparency between us from now on. No more secrets. I agree completely. Maxwell handed her a glass, his fingers brushing hers deliberately. Good. Then you'll understand why I've had Carter arrange for us to begin seeing Dr. Phillips together. Dr. Phillips, a respected marriage counselor who works with many couples in our circle. Maxwell's smile didn't reach his eyes. I think professional guidance would be beneficial as we navigate these early challenges. Ellie took a sip of water to hide her surprise. I didn't expect you to suggest counseling. I'm full of surprises, my dear. He touched her cheek lightly. Our first session is tomorrow morning. I've cleared my schedule. Something in his tone triggered a warning in Ellie's mind. Maxwell Reed didn't clear his schedule for anything or anyone. Whatever this was, it wasn't about healing their relationship. One more thing, Maxwell added casually, setting down his glass. I'd prefer if you limited your contact with Cassandra for the time being. And there it was, the catch hidden beneath the veneer of reconciliation. Excuse me? Ellie's voice was steady despite the surge of anger. She clearly has a negative perspective on our relationship, Maxwell explained reasonably. During this fragile rebuilding period, I think it's best to surround ourselves with positive influences. Cass is my oldest friend, and she's welcome to remain so. I'm simply suggesting a temporary boundary while we focus on us. His tone was gentle, reasonable, and utterly immovable. Ellie recognized the tactic from her time with Daniel. Start small, isolate gradually until the world shrinks to just the two of you, with him at the center. No, she said simply. Maxwell blinked, surprise registering briefly before his features smoothed. No? No, Ellie repeated, setting down her glass. I won't cut Cassandra out of my life, not even temporarily. She's family to me. I'm your family now, Eleanor. His voice hardened slightly. Your loyalty should be to our marriage. Loyalty doesn't mean isolation, Max. It doesn't mean cutting off people who care about me. Something dangerous flashed in Maxwell's eyes. She's poisoning you against me. I heard what she was saying in the garden. Ellie went cold. You were spying on us. I was walking by the window and overheard. The lie was smooth, practiced. She doesn't understand our relationship. She doesn't know me. Maybe not, Ellie conceded, but she knows me. And right now she's one of the few people reminding me of who I am. Maxwell's jaw tightened. And who exactly are you, Eleanor? Because the woman I married wouldn't defy me like this. The words hung between them, the mask slipping to reveal the man beneath, the man who expected absolute control. That's exactly it, Max, Ellie said quietly. You didn't marry who I am. You married who you thought I was, who you wanted me to be. And now you're discovering the difference. For a moment, something vulnerable flickered across Maxwell's face, uncertainty, perhaps even fear. Then it was gone, replaced by the cool, calculating expression she was coming to recognize as his armor. I see, he said finally. Well, this gives us plenty to discuss with Dr. Phillips tomorrow. As he turned away, dismissing her, Ellie realized that the battle lines had been drawn. The question now was whether their marriage would survive the war to come, and who would emerge victorious. Dr. Amelia Phillips's office occupied the top floor of a discreet brownstone in Manhattan's Upper East Side. The waiting room exuded calm wealth, leather furniture, original artwork, fresh flowers in crystal vases. It was the kind of place where the elite came to handle their private struggles without fear of publicity or judgment. Ellie sat beside Maxwell on a leather sofa, acutely aware of the careful distance between them. They hadn't spoken during the helicopter ride from the Hamptons, the silence heavy with unresolved tension. "Mr. and Mrs. Reed," the receptionist called softly. "Dr. Phillips will see you now." The therapist who greeted them was in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to assess and catalogue everything they did. Her office was warmly lit, with comfortable seating arranged in a triangle, no sides, nowhere to hide. "Please make yourselves comfortable," Dr. Phillips said, gesturing to the chairs. "I'm glad you've decided to come in. The early stages of marriage can be challenging even under ideal circumstances." Maxwell smiled his public smile, charming, confident, entirely false. "We believe in being proactive, Doctor. Small issues can become large ones if left unaddressed." Ellie recognized the performance. This was Maxwell in negotiation mode, presenting the image he wanted the world to see, a concerned husband invested in his marriage. The reality, his coldness since her revelation, his attempt to isolate her from Cassandra, remained carefully hidden. "Eleanor," Dr. Phillips turned her attention to Ellie. "How would you describe what brought you here?" "Today?" Ellie felt Maxwell's gaze on her, assessing, warning. "We're having some communication issues," she said carefully. "Differences in expectations." "Could you elaborate?" The therapist's tone was neutral, giving nothing away. Ellie hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I recently shared something about my past with Maxwell that changed his perception of me. We're struggling to move forward from that." Dr. Phillips nodded. "And what was this revelation, if you don't mind sharing?" "I told him about my previous engagement, something I should have been more forthcoming about earlier in our relationship." "I see." Dr. Phillips made a brief note. "Maxwell, how did this information affect you?" Maxwell crossed his legs, the picture of composed sophistication. "I was surprised naturally. Eleanor comes from a traditional background, and I had certain assumptions about her past." "Assumptions about her sexual history," Dr. Phillips clarified bluntly. Maxwell's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Among other things, yes. And why was that important to you?" The question hung in the air. Ellie watched her husband carefully, curious how he would frame his answer to sound reasonable, acceptable. "I value honesty," Maxwell said finally. "It's not about her past itself, but the fact that she allowed me to believe something that wasn't true." Dr. Phillips turned to Ellie. "Did you explicitly lie to Maxwell about your past relationships?" "No," Ellie responded. "I never claimed to be a virgin, but I knew what he believed, and I didn't correct him." "Because," Dr. Phillips prompted. "Because I was afraid of losing him," Ellie admitted. "And because I was ashamed of how my previous relationship ended." Maxwell shifted in his seat, his first sign of genuine discomfort. "Ashamed?" Ellie met his gaze directly. "Daniel was controlling, emotionally abusive. When I finally ended things, he made sure everyone in our community believed I was at fault. My parents still think I threw away a perfect relationship out of youthful rebellion." Dr. Phillips made another note. "Maxwell, how does hearing about Eleanor's experience make you feel?" "Concerned," he said after a moment, his voice carefully modulated. "Concerned that she might see similar patterns in our relationship where none exist." The therapist's eyes sharpened. "Do you believe she does?" "I think Eleanor sometimes confuses reasonable expectations with control," Maxwell replied smoothly. "For instance, I recently suggested she take a break from a particular friendship that I believe is having a negative influence on our marriage. She interpreted this as an attempt to isolate her." Ellie tensed. "Because it was." Dr. Phillips raised a hand slightly. Let's explore this. Maxwell, which friendship were you concerned about? Cassandra Taylor, Maxwell said, his distaste evident. Eleanor's friend from childhood. She's been openly critical of our relationship from the beginning. And why do you think that is? Maxwell's smile was thin. Cassandra has her own issues with men in positions of power. Her perspective is biased. She knows me better than anyone, Ellie interjected. She sees things I sometimes miss. Like what? Dr. Phillips asked. Ellie took a deep breath. Patterns. Ways in which I sometimes surrender my autonomy to keep the peace. It's something I did with Daniel, and something I promised myself I wouldn't do again. Maxwell leaned forward, his composure slipping slightly. This is exactly my point, Doctor. Eleanor is projecting her past trauma onto our relationship. I'm not Daniel. I'm trying to protect our marriage from negative outside influences. By controlling who I can see, Ellie challenged. By asking for reasonable boundaries while we work through a difficult period, Maxwell countered. Dr. Phillips observed their exchange with clinical interest. It seems to me that trust is the central issue here, not just Eleanor's honesty about her past, but Maxwell's trust in Eleanor's judgment regarding her friendships, and Eleanor's trust in Maxwell's intentions. She turned to Maxwell. You mentioned expectations earlier. What expectations did you have for your marriage? Maxwell considered the question. I expected a partnership based on mutual respect, a wife who would support my vision for our future together. And what is that vision? Dr. Phillips pressed. Success, growth, a united front as we build our legacy. Ellie felt a chill at his words. Not happiness, not love. Legacy. Eleanor, Dr. Phillips continued, what were your expectations for marriage with Maxwell? I wanted a genuine connection, Ellie said softly. A relationship where we could both be authentic, where we supported each other's growth as individuals, not just as a couple. Interesting, Dr. Phillips observed. Maxwell speaks of unity while Eleanor emphasizes individuality within the relationship. The session continued for another 40 minutes, circling around the central issues without resolution. Dr. Phillips assigned them homework, daily check-ins with each other, expressing one honest feeling without judgment or reaction, and scheduled another session for the following week. As they left the brownstone, Ellie felt emotionally drained. She'd been more honest than she'd expected to be, revealing vulnerabilities she typically kept hidden. Maxwell had remained controlled throughout, revealing only what he wished to reveal, framing each admission carefully. Lunch? He suggested as they reached the street, his tone casual, as if they'd just come from a business meeting rather than marriage counseling. I'm not hungry, Ellie replied. Maxwell checked his watch. I have meetings this afternoon at the office. I'll have James drive you back to the Hamptons, or you can stay at the penthouse if you prefer. The distance in his voice was unmistakable. Dr. Phillips's session had exposed too much, pushed him too far from his comfort zone of control. I'll go to the penthouse, Ellie decided. I need some time in the city. Maxwell nodded, already checking his phone. I'll be late, don't wait up. He kissed her cheek, a performance for anyone watching, before sliding into the waiting town car. Ellie watched it disappear into Manhattan traffic, feeling oddly liberated by his absence. Instead of taking the car Maxwell had arranged, Ellie hailed a taxi. West Village, please, she told the driver, making a spontaneous decision to visit Cassandra's apartment. Maxwell would be occupied until evening. She had hours of freedom ahead. Cassandra's building was a pre-war walk-up, with character and charm that contrasted sharply with the sterile luxury of Ellie's new life. She climbed to the 4th floor and knocked on the familiar red door. Ellie! Cassandra exclaimed, surprise and delight lighting her features. What are you doing here? Escaping, Ellie admitted, stepping into the cozy apartment. We had our first therapy session today. Cassandra raised an eyebrow. Therapy? That doesn't sound like the Maxwell Reed I've heard about. It was his idea, surprisingly. Ellie sank onto Cassandra's well-worn sofa. Though I think it's just another form of control. He chose the therapist, scheduled the appointment, and dominated the conversation. Cassandra handed Ellie a mug of tea and settled beside her. "Tell me everything." For the next hour, Ellie recounted the therapy session in detail, from Maxwell's careful performance to Dr. Phillips's probing questions. "She's good," Cassandra admitted reluctantly. "She didn't let him get away with the usual charm offensive." "No, she didn't," Ellie agreed. "But I'm not sure it matters. Max is a master at presenting exactly the image he wants people to see." Cassandra studied her friend's face. "How are you really doing, Elle? Not the sanitized version you'd tell your mother or Maxwell's friends." "The truth." Ellie's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I don't know who I am anymore, Cass. Sometimes I catch myself calculating my words, adjusting my behavior to avoid his disapproval, exactly what I did with Daniel. I promised myself never again, but here I am." "It's not too late to change course," Cassandra said gently. "You've only been married a few weeks." "And walk away from my marriage that quickly?" Ellie shook her head. "My parents would never forgive me. They already think I'm impulsive and unreliable after what happened with Daniel." "Your parents aren't living your life," Cassandra pointed out. "You are." Ellie wiped away a tear. "I need to at least try to make this work. There's good in Max, Cass. I've seen it. Glimpses of vulnerability, of the man he could be if he wasn't so afraid of losing control." Cassandra sighed. "The most dangerous words in any woman's vocabulary. I can change him." "That's not what I'm saying," Ellie protested, though part of her recognized the truth in Cassandra's words. "I just need to understand him better. His past, what shaped him." "Then maybe this will help." Cassandra hesitated, then went to her desk and retrieved a manila folder. "I was going to give this to you before the wedding, but I lost my nerve. I was afraid you'd hate me for interfering." "What is it?" Ellie asked, taking the folder. "Research," Cassandra said simply, "on Maxwell's family, his father in particular." Ellie opened the folder to find newspaper clippings, printed articles, and handwritten notes. The material spanned decades, chronicling the rise of Jonathan Reed from Boston real estate developer to financial powerhouse. But interspersed with the business successes were darker stories, lawsuits from former partners, allegations of intimidation, rumors of a violent temper. His mother filed for divorce when Maxwell was 14, Cassandra explained, pointing to one of the articles. She alleged emotional abuse, controlling behavior. The case was settled out of court, all records sealed. She moved to Europe and rarely saw Maxwell again. Ellie's hands trembled as she read. "Max never talks about his mother. He told me she abandoned them for a younger man." "Not according to my sources," Cassandra replied. "After the divorce, Jonathan Reed had complete control over his son's life. Maxwell was sent to military school, then to Harvard, his father's alma mater. Every step of his life was planned, controlled by his father," Ellie whispered, understanding dawning. "And now he's doing the same to me." "Breaking cycles is hard," Cassandra said gently, "especially when you don't recognize you're in one." Ellie continued reading, pieces of the puzzle that was Maxwell Reed falling into place. His need for control wasn't just about power, it was about safety, about never experiencing the helplessness he must have felt as a child, watching his family disintegrate. "There's one more thing," Cassandra said, her tone cautious. "Something I discovered just yesterday." She handed Ellie a final document, a receipt for a private investigator dated 6 months earlier, when Ellie and Maxwell had been dating for only 2 months. "He investigated me." Ellie felt her stomach drop. "Thoroughly," Cassandra confirmed. "My source says he had a complete background check done, including interviews with former colleagues, neighbors, even your ex." "Daniel?" Ellie's voice rose in disbelief. "Maxwell spoke with Daniel?" "According to my source, yes, shortly after your 3rd date." The revelation struck Ellie like a physical blow. All this time, while she'd been hiding her past from Maxwell, he'd already known. He'd known about Daniel, about their engagement, likely even about the messy ending. His surprise at her confession had been another performance, another manipulation. "I need to go," Ellie said suddenly, gathering the documents. Can I take these? Of course, Cassandra replied, concern etched on her face. What are you going to do? Ellie stood, a new determination in her posture. I'm going to do something I should have done from the beginning. I'm going to confront the truth, his and mine. Back at the Manhattan penthouse, Ellie spread Cassandra's documents across the dining table, adding her own notes as she worked through the timeline of Maxwell's life. By the time she heard his key in the door, night had fallen over the city. The skyline glittering beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maxwell stepped into the apartment, briefcase in hand, and froze at the sight of her surrounded by the evidence of his past. "What is this?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Ellie met his gaze steadily. "This is me trying to understand my husband, the real one, not the version you've presented to the world." Maxwell set down his briefcase with deliberate care. "Where did you get these?" "Does it matter?" Ellie gestured to the chair across from my... "Huh? We need to talk, Max, really talk, not the performance we gave Dr. Phillips today." For a moment she thought he might refuse, might retreat behind his walls of control and manipulation. Then, surprisingly, he removed his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and sat down. "What exactly do you want to know, Eleanor?" His tone was resigned, but there was something else beneath it, perhaps relief. "The truth about your mother," Ellie began, "about your childhood, and about why you investigated me before you even knew me." Maxwell's eyes widened slightly at the last item. "You've been busy." "I'm trying to save our marriage," Ellie replied, "but I can't do that without honesty." A ghost of a smile touched Maxwell's lips. "Ironic, coming from you." "I've admitted my dishonesty," Ellie said quietly. "Now it's your turn." Maxwell was silent for a long moment, his gaze moving over the scattered documents, fragments of a past he'd carefully buried beneath success and power. When he finally spoke, his voice held a vulnerability Ellie had never heard before. "My mother didn't leave for another man," he admitted. "She left because my father destroyed her. He controlled every aspect of her life until there was nothing left of the woman she'd been. Like you tried to do with me," Ellie said softly. Maxwell flinched. "I'm not my father." "Aren't you?" Ellie pushed the private investigator's receipt across the table. "You've been manipulating me from the beginning. Max, you knew about Daniel all along." He didn't deny it. "I needed to know who I was getting involved with." "You needed control," Ellie corrected, "just like your father needed control." Anger flashed in Maxwell's eyes. "You don't know anything about my father." "I know he hurt your mother. I know he controlled you, and I know you've spent your entire adult life becoming him." Ellie leaned forward. "What I don't know is why. Why perpetuate the cycle that caused you so much pain?" The question hung between them, cutting through the layers of pretense they'd built around their relationship. For the first time since she'd met him, Ellie saw raw, unfiltered emotion cross Maxwell's face. Pain, confusion, and beneath it all, fear. "Because it works," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Control is safe, vulnerability is..." He trailed off. "Dangerous," Ellie finished for him. "I know, I felt that too, Max, with Daniel, with my parents, even with you. But living in fear isn't really living." Maxwell stood abruptly, moving, to the window. Against the backdrop of the New York skyline, he looked both powerful and utterly alone. "I don't know how to be any other way," he admitted, his back to her. "This is who I am, Eleanor." Ellie rose and moved to stand beside him, not touching but close enough to share the same view of the city below. "No," she said gently. "This is who you were taught to be. There's a difference." As they stood side by side, looking out at the city that had brought them together, Ellie realized they had reached a turning point. The careful facades they'd constructed were crumbling, leaving them exposed and vulnerable. What would rise from the ruins remained to be seen. 3 weeks passed, bringing tentative change to the Reed marriage. After their confrontation in the penthouse, a fragile honesty had developed between them, moments of genuine connection interspersed with old patterns that proved difficult to break. They continued their sessions with Dr. Phillips, sometimes making progress, sometimes retreating to safer ground. Maxwell struggled to relinquish control, while Ellie fought against her tendency to acquiesce for the sake of peace. Their homework assignments often ended in tense silence or careful diplomacy rather than true revelation. On a warm Saturday morning, Ellie sat alone on the terrace of the Hamptons' house, watching the ocean and reflecting on how much had changed since their first night there. The phone call from Cassandra came unexpectedly, her friend's voice tense with urgency. "Ellie, are you sitting down?" "What's wrong?" Ellie asked, instantly alert. "I just got a call from Patricia Chen at the New York Chronicle. They're running their story on Maxwell tomorrow, something about questionable business practices in his latest development project." Ellie frowned. "Why would they call you?" "Because they're also including personal angles on his life," Cassandra explained, "including his marriage to you. They've talked to Daniel L." A cold wave of dread washed over Ellie. "What did he tell them?" "Everything, apparently. The abuse, the control, how he tried to isolate you. He's painting himself as the concerned ex who wants to warn you about falling into the same pattern with Maxwell." "That's not—" Ellie stopped, taking a deep breath. "Daniel has no right. He's twisting everything." "I know," Cassandra said softly. "That's why I'm calling. You need to prepare Maxwell. This is going to hit tomorrow morning, and it won't be pretty." After hanging up, Ellie sat frozen, her mind racing. The story would damage Maxwell's reputation, both professionally and personally. Daniel's twisted account would make headlines, dragging their private struggles into the public, i.e., Maxwell, who valued control above all else, would be utterly powerless to stop it. She found him in his home office, focused intently on his laptop. He looked up when she entered, his expression softening slightly at the sight of her, a small but meaningful change from the coldness of their early marriage. "Max, we need to talk." She closed the door behind her. "Something's happening that you need to know about." She told him everything Cassandra had shared, watching as his expression shifted from concern to cold fury. "Daniel," he repeated, the name like ice on his tongue. "Your ex-fiancé is talking to the press about our marriage." "Yes, but he's lying, Max. He's twisting what happened between us to make himself look like the victim. He's always been good at that." Maxwell stood, pacing the length of the office. "We can get ahead of this. I'll have legal draw up cease and desist letters immediately. We'll threaten the paper with a lawsuit if they print a word of this garbage." "It won't work," Ellie said quietly. "They'll run it anyway. They know it'll sell papers. And fighting it will just make it look like we have something to hide." "We do have something to hide." Maxwell's control slipped, his voice rising. "Our private life is not for public consumption. I won't have them printing lies about my wife or my business." "They're not all lies, though, are they?" Ellie met his gaze steadily. "Some of it is true. Daniel was controlling, and so are you, Max." Maxwell stared at her, conflict evident in his expression. "This isn't the time for that discussion, Eleanor. We need to handle this crisis." "No," Ellie said firmly. "This is exactly the time, because how we handle this crisis depends on whether we're still hiding from the truth or finally facing it." She moved closer to him, close enough to see the pulse beating rapidly at his throat. "You investigated me before we were serious. You knew about Daniel all along. You let me struggle to tell you the truth when you already knew it. Why, Max? Why the manipulation?" Maxwell turned away, his shoulders rigid with tension. For a long moment, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was strangely vulnerable. "Because I needed to be sure." "Sure of what?" "That you weren't like her." He rubbed his face with one hand, suddenly looking exhausted. "My mother. She left so easily. One day she was there, the next she was gone. My father said she never really loved us, that she'd been pretending all along." Understanding dawned on Ellie. "So you test everyone, you push to see if they'll leave." "I needed to know if you were genuine," Maxwell admitted, "if what you felt for me was real, or if you were just another person who saw what I could provide." "By investigating me, by manipulating me?" Ellie shook her head. "That's not how trust works, Max." "I don't know how trust works," he replied with unexpected honesty. "I've never had it." The admission hung between them, raw and painful. Ellie's heart ached for the boy Maxwell had been, raised by a father who taught him that love was a transaction, that people were either assets or liabilities. This story, she said finally, it gives us a choice. We can fight it with lawyers and denials, maintaining the perfect image while continuing to hide from each other, or we can face it together honestly. What are you suggesting? Maxwell asked warily. That we tell our own story, the real one. Ellie took a deep breath. I'll give an interview addressing Daniel's claims directly. I'll talk about my relationship with him, about his manipulation and control, and I'll talk about us, the real us, not the society page. Aversion? Maxwell's expression was impossible to read. You want to publicly discuss our marriage? I want to be honest about who we are and what we're working through, Ellie clarified. Not the airbrushed version, but the messy, complicated reality. I'll talk about how we're both learning and growing, how we're trying to break cycles of control and fear. That's extremely personal, Eleanor. Yes, she agreed, but it's also true. And truth has a power that no amount of legal maneuvering can match. Maxwell moved to the window, gazing out at the ocean. Ellie could see the conflict in his posture, the ingrained need for control battling with the possibility of a different way forward. I don't know if I can be that exposed, he said finally, that vulnerable. I know. Ellie moved to stand beside him. It's terrifying, but I'll be right there with you. Maxwell turned to her, studying her face as if seeing her for the first time. Why would you do this for me, after everything? Because I meant my vows, Ellie said simply. For better or worse, and because I see you, Max, the real you beneath all the armor. I've always seen you. Something shifted in Maxwell's eyes, a softening, a surrender. He reached for her hand, his touch tentative in a way it had never been before. Do what you think is right, he said quietly. I trust you. 3 simple words, more powerful than any declaration of love could have been in that moment. I trust you. From Maxwell Reed, those words were nothing short of revolutionary. The next morning, as the New York Chronicle ran its exposé on Maxwell Reed's business practices and personal life, featuring damning quotes from Daniel Johnson about Eleanor Reed's pattern of falling for controlling men, a competing story appeared in the Manhattan Herald. The headline read simply, Eleanor Reed speaks, the truth about love, control, and second chances. In the article, Eleanor spoke candidly about her previous relationship with Daniel Johnson, describing the emotional manipulation and control she had experienced. She addressed his claims directly, noting that it's sadly common for abusers to rewrite history, casting themselves as the victim. She spoke of her marriage to Maxwell as a work in progress, acknowledging that both of them were working to overcome patterns learned in childhood. My husband and I are not perfect people. She was quoted as saying, we're both learning how to love without fear, how to be vulnerable when everything in our past has taught us to build walls. It's not always pretty, but it's honest. And honesty, I'm discovering, is where real love begins. The story, written by Cassandra Taylor, included a statement from Maxwell that shocked New York. Society. My wife's courage in telling her truth inspires me. I was raised to believe that control equals strength, but Eleanor is teaching me that true strength lies in having the courage to be vulnerable. The fallout was immediate and intense. Business associates called emergency meetings, society friends whispered behind their hands, and Maxwell's father, still a powerful figure in Boston financial circles, left a scathing voicemail demanding his son get his house in order. Through it all, Maxwell remained surprisingly steady. When the board of his company called an emergency meeting to address the business allegations in the Chronicle article, he attended with Eleanor at his side, a united front neither had anticipated when their marriage began. Mr. Reed, the board chairman began, these allegations are deeply concerning. The claim that you pressured city officials on the waterfront development is partially true, Maxwell interrupted, causing a ripple of shock around the table. My approach was aggressive and in retrospect crossed ethical lines I should have respected. I take full responsibility and am prepared to make amends. Ellie watched her husband with quiet pride. This public accountability was new for him, a step away from his father's legacy of denial and intimidation. The meeting lasted hours, resulting in a substantial donation to community development in the affected neighborhood and a restructuring of Maxwell's approach to future projects. When they finally emerged, both were exhausted but strangely exhilarated. Maxwell loosened his tie as they stepped into the waiting car, unlike anything I've ever experienced. Honesty usually is, Ellie replied, squeezing his hand. How does it feel? He considered the question seriously. Terrifying. Liberating. A small smile touched his lips. Not entirely unpleasant. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn evening, Ellie stood in the entrance of their Manhattan penthouse, surveying the gathering with a sense of achievement. Friends and colleagues mingled comfortably, the atmosphere warm and relaxed, a far cry from the formal, carefully orchestrated events that had characterized their early marriage. Cassandra approached, champagne glass in hand. Not bad for your first dinner party as the real Mrs. Reed. Ellie smiled. It feels right. Different, but right. And how's the man of the house handling the chaos? Cassandra nodded toward Maxwell, who was engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Phillips. Now, they friend as well as their therapist and her husband. Better than I expected, Ellie admitted. He's learning that not everything needs to be perfect to be good. And that's the secret to life, isn't it? Cassandra clinked her glass against Ellie's. Speaking of imperfect but good, how's the new project coming along? Ellie's face lit up. The foundation launches next month. We've already lined up partnerships with 3 women's shelters in the city and 2 more upstate. Maxwell's connections have been invaluable. Turns out he's quite persuasive when he believes in something. The Reed Foundation for Empowerment had been Ellie's idea, a way to support women emerging from controlling relationships with education, housing, and legal assistance. To her surprise, Maxwell had embraced the concept wholeheartedly, leveraging his business network to secure funding and support. I'm proud of you, Cassandra said, her eyes unusually serious. Not just for the foundation, but for everything. You didn't just save yourself, Elle, you might have saved him too. Across the room, Maxwell caught Ellie's eye, a silent communication passing between them. He excused himself from his conversation and made his way to her side. Everything okay? He asked, his hand finding the small of her back in a gesture that had once felt possessive, but now felt like connection. Perfect, Ellie replied, leaning into him slightly. Just catching up with Cass. Don't let me interrupt, Maxwell said, nodding to Cassandra with genuine warmth, another significant change from their early days. I wanted to let you know that Natalie Chen from the Women's Law Project is here. She's interested in providing pro bono services for the foundation. As Maxwell moved away to greet new arrivals, Cassandra raised an eyebrow. Okay, who is that? Man, and what have you done with Maxwell Reed? Ellie laughed. He's still Maxwell Reed, just a version with fewer walls and more heart. Later that night, after the last guest had departed, Ellie found Maxwell on the terrace, looking out at the city lights. She joined him in comfortable silence, reflecting on the journey that had brought them here. I never thought I could live this way, Maxwell said finally. Which way? Openly, honestly. He turned to face her. I spent my entire life building fortresses, Eleanor. I thought they were keeping me safe, but they were just keeping me isolated. Ellie touched his face gently. We all build walls when we're hurt. The courage comes in being willing to take them down. I wouldn't have found that courage without you. His voice was soft but certain. When you challenged me that night, when you refused to let me hide behind control and manipulation, you gave me a choice I didn't know I had. And you took it, Ellie reminded him. That was all you. Maxwell took her hands in his. I want to renew our vows, he said suddenly. Not for society, not for appearances, just for us. A real beginning, with both of us fully present this time. Tears sprang to Ellie's eyes. I'd like that. No perfect image, Maxwell continued, his own eyes suspiciously bright. No control, just us, messy and imperfect and real. Just us, Ellie agreed, rising on tiptoe to kiss him. A kiss that felt like a promise, like freedom, like coming home. As they stood together under the vast New York sky, Eleanor Reed reflected on the strange path that had led her here. She had entered her marriage seeking safety and acceptance, only to discover that true security came not from control, but from the courage to be vulnerable. And Maxwell, who had sought to make her into his ideal, had instead been remade himself. Not by her power, but by her truth. They were not perfect. They still struggled, still worked daily to break the patterns of their past. But they were real and they were free, and in the end, that was worth more than any fairy tale ending could provide. In the distance, the city continued its restless dance of light and shadow, a reminder that transformation was never complete, never final. Life would continue to challenge them, to offer new choices between fear and courage, between control and trust. But for the first time, Eleanor knew with certainty that whatever came next, they would face it together, not as the people they pretended to be, but as the people they truly were. And that, she realized, was the greatest liberation of all. Femme de Historia. Thank you for joining us on this emotional journey through Maxwell and Eleanor's transformation. Their story reminds us that true freedom comes not from controlling others, but from having the courage to be our authentic selves. If you've been moved by their journey from control to vulnerability, from perfect appearances to messy reality, please subscribe to our channel for more powerful narratives that explore the complexities of human relationships. Hit the like button if you've ever struggled with being your true self, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every week, we bring you new stories that illuminate the human experience in all its imperfect glory. Don't miss our upcoming series on family dynamics starting next Thursday. Your engagement means the world to us. Join our community of storytellers and truth seekers today.